A few of you might have seen my video on Orientalism. It's actually my second video and it has been almost a year since then, which is crazy to me. In that video, I laid the groundwork for today's topic, Techno-Orientalism. But that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily watch it first. I will summarize the basic points of my first video here, but if you want a more in-depth analysis that also goes into the theoretical background like discourse analysis and post-structuralism, you can check it out first and then come back here. The reason I want to take a deeper look at Techno-Orientalism is a conversation I had with a friend a few weeks ago. She came across a documentary about dating culture in Japan on YouTube by a German national television channel. In the documentary, the life of a few Japanese singles is followed and commented by a German reporter who also interviews them in English. And let me tell you, it is really hard to watch. She constantly touches her obviously uncomfortable interview partners, asks suggestive questions about them being too shy to date and interested in anime characters, and has no intercultural competence whatsoever. Japan is depicted as a country of lonely, socially incompetent people that are obsessed with work and only interact with rented girlfriends. In the end, my friend was not able to finish the documentary because it made her too uncomfortable, and we talked about how a lot of this feeling stems from the awareness that this depiction is far from being a unique case. If it were, you might be able to think, well, that was a weird reporter, let's move on to the next video and forget about it. But the fact is that these depictions are extremely common and play into what Rowe, Huang and Niu describe as Techno-Orientalism in 2015. Before that, the term was already coined by Morley and Robbins in 1995, specifically in relation to US-American pop culture and its depiction of Japan. This topic goes way beyond the cultural incompetence of this one reporter in the documentary, her personal stereotypes, or the need for an interesting story that this news channel had. And I hope to show that to you today. First, I will provide some background information on Orientalism to give you an idea of what the researchers using this term are expanding on and referring to. Then I will talk about the historical background leading to the changes from Orientalism to Techno-Orientalism in the case of some countries. After that, I will discuss characteristics of Techno-Orientalism and give you a few examples like a further analysis of the dynamics in the documentary and some of my own experiences after living and studying in Taiwan for a year. I hope you enjoyed the video. Orientalism is a groundbreaking concept first presented by Edward Said in his 1978 book called Orientalism. In this work, Said criticizes the discourse around the so-called Orient by European and North American colonial forces over the last millennials. By referring to countless examples and literary and political texts, he shows how the way that these cultures talked and wrote about the quote-unquote Orient actually created that unity of an Orient in the first place, and grouped together a vastly diverse group of countries and cultures. Thereby, the West constructed their opposite, their other. So what he's saying is that the Orient does not actually exist as a cultural unity, but was created by the discourse about it in these Western countries, which try to construct a self-identity by differentiating themselves from this opposing other called the Orient. In this process, they position themselves as the modern, logical, manly, rational, and mind-focused self, while the Orient is constructed as the traditional, intuitive, emotional, womanly, body-focused other. Within this discourse, the Orient can be appreciated for its traditions, its spirituality and harmony with nature, but ultimately remains different and behind the evolving and developing West. The Orient is constructed as an underdeveloped, primitive other, but simultaneously exoticized and an object of Western fantasy. I'm sure you can think of thousands of movies, books, travel videos, and reports that reflect this. I feel like it's one of those concepts where once you hear it, you cannot stop seeing it everywhere. The countries described as the Orient are often former colonies of England, France, and the US, and other colonial forces, of course, but this is Said's focus. And by depicting them in that way, the colonial forces legitimize their occupation and governance of these countries. Egypt, India, and other former colonies are described as unable to govern themselves because of their Orientalist qualities and characteristics, as not politicized and democratic, and as in need of Western intervention. Today, the Orient is made the background of the white Western traveler that wants to have a break of this rational technological workforce life in the West and immerse himself in a spiritual experience while also exoticizing the quote-unquote Oriental exotic woman, then returning home and stressing that the culture is so traditional and special, but the country really needs political support by Western governments to escape its cycle of poverty. The Orient remains mystified, remains othered, remains a concept that reflects the need of the West constructing it, whether that need is a legitimization for colonialism or now the longing for spirituality. I hope I was able to paint a picture in your mind now, for this was mostly my intention in this part. If you want a more theoretical and text-based analysis of Orientalism by Said, and also learn how it connects to misogyny, you can watch my video. For now, I wanted to bring across the most important points, how the Orient is a construction where countries with huge differences are grouped into one mystified other that opposes the West. How this othering and this construction reflects the need of the West over time, from legitimization for colonialism to fantasies of a cheap backpacking trip that connects you to your spiritual side. And also to name the specific characteristics that are ascribed to the Oriental countries, which are, again, traditionality, intuition, emotion, femininity, the body, connection to nature, and so on. Keep this in mind for the next part, where we will see how this shifts with new developments in East Asia. Western colonialism in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia was, for the longest time, the background for Orientalism. But during the 20th century, the global economic power structures changed drastically, and with it, the way in which Orientalism presents itself. From the beginning of the 20th century onwards, Japan establishes itself as a military power that matches the Occident and even surpasses it in the Russo-Japanese War. But more importantly, after the Cold War, Japan and China rise to become global economic and technological players at an unprecedented speed. Japan especially establishes itself as a technological innovator, and Japanese products like Sony, Nintendo, and Toyota quickly are in the top global import products. Meanwhile, China is becoming the world factory with a manufacturing power that is unmatched. Neoliberal structures, of course, lead to this affecting the locations of new factories being built. You have to imagine that within the very widespread Orientalist viewpoint of the West, the Orient was always characterized as static and unchanging, which of course was never true to begin with, but nevertheless led to an even bigger shock when it became so obvious that it wasn't. And this shock led to a feeling of threat. The West had always seen itself as the technological modernity, as the future, essentially. So how does the West react when its development is not only surpassed in speed, but also matched or surpassed in manufacturing power and technological innovation and in economic prosperity? It reacts with Techno-Orientalism. Techno-Orientalism was mostly described and coined as a term analyzing the way in which East Asia is depicted in Western movies and media, and used as a signifier for technology and a dystopian cyborg-like future. The concept describes how Techno-Orientalism ascribes a relationship between East Asians and technology that goes beyond the way in which the West feels that it interacts with technology. At least on a discourse level, the impression is that we, quote-unquote, we use technology as a tool for communication, an aid for certain tasks, but we decide deliberately when to use it and when not to. Techno-Orientalism, however, shows East Asians as having a more entangled relationship with technology, in the most extreme cases turning them into a signifier for robotic cyborgs that have lost all human touch. You can already see how Techno-Orientalism relates to other racial prejudice and stereotypes that were around before the technological rise of Japan and Korea, most visibly in the US with East Asian immigration waves. East Asians are described as cold, socially awkward or shy, emotionless but extremely hardworking and intelligent, especially in maths and science. You can see how that is not far from portraying them as robotic in movies and other visual media. Oli Sanvia has a very good video about the Asian model minority concept, and I really recommend you watch it for further insight on this. So, as I was saying, Techno-Orientalism in movies connected to prior stereotypes about Asians, and related these to technology and futurism. Movies you can think of are, for example, the original Blade Runner, Cloud Atlas, or Ghost in a Shell. That much for the topic of movies and visual media. Here, however, I want to widen this discourse and show how it is not only present in visual media, but also in news and social discourses about East Asia on a societal level. And for that, we need to understand what exactly the function of these stereotypes and these depictions are. As I said, the historical background is the economic rise of East Asian countries. Before, the West literally saw itself as the first world. Well, it still does, but anyway. When I say West, I mostly mean North America and Western Europe. So while these countries claim this position by pointing to their technological innovations and economic prosperity, they now could not realistically remain in this position without again differentiating themselves in some fundamental way from their very real and very close competition in East Asia. Techno-Orientalism arises out of a feeling of threat for the global hegemony of the West in economy, technology, and culture. Because the West can no longer claim this position, they present East Asians as having a skewed relationship to the technology they produce, as having lost some sort of humanness that the West still possesses. East Asia is presented as a dystopian technological future that the West wants to protect itself from, and that has lost some fundamental aspect of humanity. That is what Techno-Orientalism is all about. So now you see how all of this connects to the documentary I talked about in the beginning, and also to countless other news reports and social media portrayals of Japan, Korea, and China. In the documentary, Japanese people are depicted as having lost the ability to communicate among each other, as being so incapable of human interaction that they have to have the help of a Western reporter that does not even speak their language or know anything about their culture, but that still possesses the Western humanness and ability to be overly touchy with people they don't know and that are clearly uncomfortable with it. And I have seen so many reports like this. If Japan, Korea, and China are in the news in Germany for a non-political or economic reason, it is to depict a subculture of people that, for instance, date AI characters or anime cosplayers, which can of course be a subgroup of people there. But it is just so wrong to think about the image that this is presenting to the people that have no other contact with this culture and take these stories to be the norm. And they all reproduce exactly the same shy, robotic stereotype of people with more parasocial relationships than normal human contact, that voluntarily choose to work 80-hour weeks because they're just so work-obsessed and not because they literally have no other choice. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it also connects to my own experience of going to Taiwan. I spent 2 semesters studying there and had a lot of conversations before and after that. What I'm referring to now are mostly short conversations I had with people I don't know super well, in which there wasn't a lot of time to go into deeper thoughts and feelings about this trip. But even within this short time, I could feel so many assumptions that people made. I mean, first of all, no one really knew where Taiwan is, but that's a different point. What struck with me most was that people were not really excited about it. They were very inhibited, and not because of the safety concerns due to the threat of invasion, but because they had a, and I'm sorry to say it, but it's true, very Techno-Orientalist view of the culture and the society. I noticed this especially after I returned, because in these short conversations, people almost implied the answers they wanted to hear in the questions they asked me. But the people were kind of shy, right? But I'm sure it was kind of hard to connect to people there. Stuff like this. They didn't ask this because they were referring to the language barrier, because when a friend got back from Thailand, I didn't hear anything like that. Of course, cultures can have different sort of levels of extroversion and introversion, mostly in the sense of how normal it is to talk to random strangers. Of course, there's a difference in this between, for example, the US and Japan. But still, the feeling I got from these conversations was that people really thought that the culture in Taiwan is so reserved and close that Taiwanese people basically didn't interact with each other. With this section, I didn't want to finger point other people's stereotypes, and I'm sorry it seemed that way. Not because it's not okay to point out these stereotypes, but because I don't want to position myself as someone that doesn't have them or is like above this. I more wanted to show how spread this viewpoint is and how affected we all are by it, these media portrayals and news reports, to the point where university students of liberal arts or political sciences reproduce these Orientalist views. Again, I want to stress that cultural differences are existent and that it can be an interesting field of research or even just topic of conversation to talk about them and investigate them, especially with people from other backgrounds. That is not what I want to ever argue against. It is something super enriching to have a look at the human experience from different perspectives and different cultural influences. But in the case of Techno-Orientalism, countries are essentialized and grouped together, cultures are patronized and regarded from a distance, with the goal to establish a self-identity of the West and further legitimize Western hegemony and interventionist politics. That's why I think this topic is super important, and I hope you could take something away from this video. See you next time. If you got to this part and enjoyed the video, I would be super happy if you gave it a thumbs up. Do you even call it that on YouTube? I don't know. Or subscribe to my channel, and especially if you want to share your thoughts on the topic or some experience you have with this, or also give a different point of view. I would be super interested in hearing that. Thank you so much. Bye.